Hey guys, Nathan from Arms and Armor. Today, we're gonna look at the biggest swords that were ever actually used. So, this beast, which is 6.5 feet tall, here you can see the whole thing, is an old sword, but it's not an original sword. This is actually a Victorian replica of a 16th century bearing sword. Its dimensions are pretty similar to Landsknecht Zweihanders, which have these parrying lugs on the sides here that come off of the ricasso, right? So these spikes are meant to essentially catch blades. The ricasso here is not sharp, and then it has this long blade on it, a wide guard with rings, and a super long handle with this scent stopper pommel on the end. These swords, the originals, were essentially a kind of pole arm, right? You could hold it like this or like this when you were fighting. Historically, right, there's been a kind of line that they were used to face off against lines of pikemen, and people that hold them were called doppel soldiers or double soldiers. This particular piece, we can tell it's a bearing sword. It's decorative, not meant to be used, because it weighs 12 pounds. Right? That's way too heavy to be used. Right? No swords that were meant to be used weighed 12 pounds. The reason this one is so heavy is that this blade has no distal taper, right? It's super long and it remains just about a 1/4 inch thick all the way out to the end. This giant Victorian reproduction is probably one of the reasons that Victorians, like Hutton and Eagleton, all those guys, right, who were trying to reconstruct some medieval sword fighting, thought that the swords were giant and heavy because they're handling these reproductions. It's a cool sword. The original would have weighed half what this one weighs. So in comparison, I have this real sword. And so this is an Arms and Armor custom two-hander. It's even bigger than our 15th century two-hander, which is one of our catalog pieces. This one is about 5'6" tall, this long waisted grip, and an S-shaped guard. This sword you can actually use, right? I can use it one-handed here, two-handed. It's deadly and fast. This sword weighs 5.5 pounds. So it weighs almost exactly half of what that fake bearing sword weighs. Now these types of swords, right, if this were a Landsknecht Zweihander, the blade would be pretty similar, the balance would be pretty similar. It might be a little bit bigger, have a little bit more of an ornate guard, and it would probably have had those parrying lugs and a ricasso up here. Those lugs were often made by essentially splitting the blade and then just forging it down as you made the ricasso, right? But this has a balance and moves much more like those original swords. Now this thing, right, is not just a big long sword. It's a totally different weapon. You can't really use it the same way that you would use a longsword because it has so much more momentum and mass to it, right? Even though it's a beautifully balanced sword, right? It's harmonically balanced, everything. It is a different weapon than longswords. So I'll put that down. We'll just compare that to this, our English longsword, right? Which is a classic high medieval longsword. This weighs 2.5 pounds, right? Instead of 5.5 pounds. So this is half again the weight of a two-handed sword. So when you're comparing long swords and two-handed swords, keep this in mind. It's not so much the length of the grip, right? There are long swords that have somewhat longer grips than this. It's the overall size of the piece, right? If I put this on the ground, it comes up to my navel instead of to my eyes. And so this longsword is a classical and kind of canonical longsword. It's a beautiful piece. This one has an oxblood handle. It's a custom one for somebody. They'll be getting it soon. So, when you think about long swords and two-handed swords, just have this scale in mind. The sources for how to fight with them are dramatically different. These really, really big long swords are mostly quite late, right? 16th century, some even 17th century for kind of destreza sources with the Montante. Check them out. Take a look at our 15th century two-hander if you want a stock piece, or you can inquire about an even bigger monster. Thank you.